Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we're covering everything D&D and Baldur's Gate 3.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Kelly and I are diving deep into Baldur's Gate 3, and today we're going to talk about 10 must-have spells for any playthrough.
We're going to be focusing on spells that range from cantrips up to level 3 or 4, so that basically anybody playing the game has access to them pretty quickly in their playthrough. And we are going to be talking about these spells from the perspective of Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of these spells are ones that we have recommended many times in D&D, but we're going to talk about what makes them specifically great choices for Baldur's Gate 3.
My advice with any of these spells is grab them on whatever characters you can as early as possible in Act 1, and we'll discuss some of the ways you can access them in that way. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get rolling.
Kicking things off with a very popular spell for clerics, druids, and Pact of the Tome warlocks, we're looking at Guidance.
Guidance is a cantrip that when you cast it on a character, they get 1d4 to their ability checks for the next minute. Most notably, you can cast Guidance when you are in the dice rolling screen, so it's very easy to add 1d4 to basically any skill check that any of your characters making at any time.
What I love about the implementation of Guidance in Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the biggest pitfalls of Guidance in the tabletop D&D game is players forgetting to use it or not being sure when to say, hey, I'd like to cast Guidance before we do this roll. But in Baldur's Gate 3, because it's all automated and built into the system, you just get that option presented to you all the time. You never miss the chance to cast Guidance. And because cantrips are free to cast as much as you want, this basically just gives you a plus 1d4 for everything for almost everybody in the party all the time.
Guidance does last for 1 minute though, and one of the areas where it can apply that you might not realize is in stealth and perception checks. The best way to do this is to actually enter turn-based mode, cast Guidance, and this way whichever character you have acting as a scout, either stealthing forward to look for traps or hide from enemies, they're going to get that benefit from Guidance on their stealth and perception checks as well as they're heading forward.
Shadowheart comes with Guidance right away, so it's a great reason to keep her around all the time. But if you don't like Shadowheart and you don't have a druid in your party, then you can also find a magical amulet that allows you to cast Guidance in Act 1. We're not going to specify where, but it's out there if you're looking.
In short though, there's a ton of skill checks in Baldur's Gate 3. Any party should have one character that can cast Guidance. It just makes every dice roll that much easier.
Moving on to the second spell that we're going to talk about today, another fan favorite from D&D is even better in Baldur's Gate 3, and that is Mage Hand, which is available to bards, sorcerer, warlock, wizard, and eldritch knights.
In Baldur's Gate 3, Mage Hand is a summon, which means that it actually is a creature that you can control, that you can move it around and manipulate it just like any one of your party members. Although Mage Hand can't pick up objects and add them to its inventory, it doesn't have an inventory, it can move around, it can interact with objects, it can throw switches, and it can even act as a diversion for enemies in combat because they will attack it.
One of the most notable uses of Mage Hand in Baldur's Gate 3 that usually isn't seen on the tabletop game is that Mage Hand can be used to either shove a creature or throw an object.
I've used Mage Hand to push goblins off buildings in Act 1, so it can be a great way to cheese a lot of combat encounters and solve lots of puzzles. Absolutely a must-have to bring along.
Now, as we move on to our third spell, there's a lot of combat in Baldur's Gate 3, and you and your allies might be going down more often than you would expect to in D&D. So that brings us to our next spell, Healing Word, which is available for bards and clerics, and also druids.
Healing Word's super simple. As a bonus action at range, you heal an ally for 1d4 hit points. It is the perfect way to stabilize someone and get them back into the fight in the middle of combat. They're still going to have to stand up from prone, so they're going to lose their action on their turn back in. But unlike the also first level Cure Wounds, Healing Word is a bonus action and it's ranged. Whereas Cure Wounds, sure, it does a little bit more healing, but it doesn't really compare because you have to move up to the down target and actually touch them. In general, in combat healing is pretty bad in D&D, and it's pretty bad in Baldur's Gate 3. I would not recommend making a dedicated healer character in your party, and it is absolutely not worth trying to keep your party members topped up in combat. Healing Word is probably the only healing spell you need just to save your downed allies in the middle of battle.
The other thing that makes Healing Word so valuable in Baldur's Gate 3 is that there is an exception to the rules in Baldur's Gate 3 from D&D, and that is that the bonus action spell casting feature, if you cast a spell as a bonus action, usually in D&D it means that you have to use your action to only cast a cantrip. But that doesn't exist in Baldur's Gate 3. So with Healing Word, you can cast Healing Word to up an ally who has fallen and then still deliver those great cleric spells that you want to on your turn.
It gets even better than that because Spiritual Weapon is its own summon, and normally in D&D 5th edition, you have to use your bonus action to make your Spiritual Weapon attack. So clerics are just really amazing in Baldur's Gate 3 because their spiritual weapons act independently. They can cast Healing Word and throw Guiding Bolt in the same turn. It's really, really strong when they need to use it, and so ultimately, you want to make sure that there's at least 1 or 2 characters in your party that have Healing Word for those emergency situations when you need to bring someone back into the fight. But that's about as far as I would go with healing. Because characters can use potions as a bonus action for themselves, you're better off just keeping your party well stocked with potions than you are trying to have one of your party members as a dedicated healer.
Now, similar to the vein of healing, but slightly different, another spell available for clerics and paladins is the second level spell Aid, which is one of our favorite spells in D&D, and it is just as useful in Baldur's Gate 3.
This is because when you cast Aid, it increases your entire party's hit point maximum until you take a long rest. So basically the way to use Aid is that as soon as you finish your long rest for the one day, have your cleric just slam that Aid button. They use up a spell slot, but all of your party gets 5 extra hit points for the second level version. It is 100% worth upcasting Aid to the highest level spell slot that your cleric or paladin has available. The mileage you'll get out of it is so good because, of course, Aid not only increases the hit point maximum of your party, which means it stacks with anything that gives them temporary hit points, but that hit point maximum increase also means that your party is going to get more hit points back when they take a short rest as well. So as a third level spell slot, it's giving every one of your party members 10 extra hit points. Fourth level spell slot, giving them 15. Fifth level spell slot, giving them 20. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of the best things that your characters can do with their, even with those high level spell slots. Take Aid, don't look back. Already you can tell Shadowheart's pretty powerful in in Baldur's Gate 3 because she's going to be able to bring Healing Word, Guidance, and Aid in addition to all those amazing other cleric spells. So I hope you like Shadowheart.
Another important part of Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be your maneuverability on the battlefield or getting to hard-to-reach places, which is why our next spell, Misty Step, is going to be pretty key. This spell is available to sorcerers, warlocks, wizards, Oath of Vengeance paladins, and Gloomstalker rangers.
Misty Step is a second level spell that's a bonus action to cast, and all that happens when you cast it is your character gets to teleport to a space that they can see. What's really notable about Misty Step in Baldur's Gate 3 is that its range is doubled. In 5th edition, it has a range of only 30 feet, which is the same as most characters' movement speed. But in Baldur's Gate 3, its range is 18 meters compared to the 9 meter speed that most characters have. So it really lets you transition far across the battlefield.
It really lets you take control of your positioning on the battlefield. And thanks to Larian Studios' level design, a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 has many layers of verticality to it that a lot of DMs don't necessarily use in their home games. And because of this level design, because of how much is happening above or below you, the ability to teleport very easily the 60 feet is going to come in handy more often than even in a regular tabletop game. Misty Step is still regarded as one of the best teleportation options out there.
It's even better because Larian also loves their surfaces, their areas of fire, their areas of poison, their areas of difficult terrain, and Misty Step basically just bypasses all of that. Misty Step is also great because As a bonus action, your character's still going to preserve their action. So if you're in a combat encounter where there's also any sort of environmental hazards that you need to avoid or objects that you need to interact with, Misty Step is going to mean that your character can still move over, do those things. And of course, it benefits just like Healing Word in that you can Misty Step and throw a fireball in the same turn if you need to.
As we move on to our next spell, all the wizards out there are probably packing Firebolt or some sort of fire-using spell, but I think the underrated spell that they should be looking at as well to pair with those is Grease. It's a first-level spell, and if you see it, you should take it, especially to pair with something like Firebolt. The main thing that Grease does, it creates a spot of grease on the ground, and a creature who's walking into that area has a chance of slipping and falling. Now, the main reason why this is so valuable in Baldur's Gate 3 is that the prone condition is far harsher in Baldur's Gate 3 than it is in D&D. In D&D, if you fall down and are knocked prone, you spend half your movement to get up, and you carry on. But in Baldur's Gate 3, it is an entire action to stand up from prone.
Falling prone also breaks your concentration, and the greased area also does slow movement speed down as well. You could also light the grease on fire by using the Firebolt cantrip, or you can even freeze it to make it a more enduring piece of ice to slip on by using Ray of Frost.
So the way that Grease pairs with your other cantrips or spells is actually really exciting in Baldur's Gate 3 and should not be overlooked as an option to knock enemies down in the middle of battle.
Speaking of creating surfaces, one very underrated spell that completely flies under the radar in traditional D&D is Create or Destroy Water, but it's amazing in Baldur's Gate 3. Create or Destroy Water, when you cast it, allows you to create a puddle of rain, basically. It's similar in implementation to Baldur's Gate 3 as the rain spell from Divinity Original Sin 2. This creates a water surface, and it also makes any creatures in that area wet. Why would you want to make creatures wet? Well,
wet is not a condition that we have in D&D, but when a creature is wet in Baldur's Gate 3, this means that they have resistance to fire damage, which is great, but it means that they have vulnerability to lightning or cold damage. So, if you have Create or Destroy Water, you can create a puddle under your enemies, and then pairing that with the right spell, like Lightning Bolt or Cone of Cold, is going to have devastating effects on your enemies.
You could even start using at very low levels with Ray of Frost and Shocking Grasp. And what's really neat about both of those spells is that Ray of Frost will freeze the water, creating an ice surface that you can then knock people prone with, or you can electrify the surface as well, creating the electrocution condition as well. So even with using these first level spells and cantrips, you can get much more powerful effects out of them through the elemental interactions that are possible in Baldur's Gate 3 than you can in the tabletop game.
It's a first level spell and it's available to druids or clerics, so make sure to grab it if you can because that wet condition goes a long way.
Man, Shadowheart is just getting more and more overpowered.
You can also use Create or Destroy Water if you're fighting some enemies that are throwing fire at you to drop on your own party.
Yeah.
To protect yourself. So it's kind of a double-edged sword here.
It's really good. It's clutch. Not to sing more praises of what the clerics and the druids can do, or the bards for that matter, but our next tie is between Faerie Fire and Bless. These are two spells that are great if you've got access to one, but they become super amazing when you do use them together. Bless is a first level spell that affects up to 3 targets. You can choose your heaviest hitting allies, and they're going to get a 1d4 bonus to their attack rolls and saving throws for the duration of Bless. It's really great when you've got characters that can make multiple attacks per turn because they get that extra d4 to hit on every single attack that they make.
If you pair this with Faerie Fire is a first level spell that allows you to cover an area in glittering magical light that all creatures inside of it need to make a saving throw, and if they are affected by it, they glitter, giving the party advantage to hit them. If you pair this with Bless, this means that your whole party now has advantage on attacking the enemies and are adding an additional 1d4, the chance to miss, basically becomes nullified at that point.
It's a huge accuracy swing. This is a huge accuracy swing and is a wonderful combination if you've got a bard and a cleric in your party, or if you have a cleric and a druid, because both these spells do require concentration. The other hidden benefit of Faerie Fire is that it also illuminates invisible creatures in the area. So it's a very easy way for your entire party to see an invisible creature rather than having one character have to cast See Invisibility as a second level spell. Faerie Fire is going to illuminate the invisible creatures and give you advantage on attacking them. So both of these, both Bless and Faerie Fire, tie in this spot for great accuracy buffs, and they work even better when you use them together.
The next spells that we want to talk about are another tie just because of their similar nature, and that is Speak with Animals and Speak with Dead. The main reason why these spells are so exciting in Baldur's Gate 3 is the sheer amount of opportunities that you will get to use them to gain information you wouldn't have otherwise had. This just opens up and broadens the social aspect of the game in a lot of really astounding ways.
It is shocking how much information you can learn from squirrels and corpses in Act 1 of Baldur's Gate 3. So much so that actually very early in the game, you can find an amulet that will give whoever wears it the ability to cast Speak with Dead. Both of these spells are rituals, so they don't consume one of your spell slots. And because Baldur's Gate 3 is a computer role-playing game, just having all those extra dialogue options of more creatures and more targets that your characters can talk to is a really big boon. One of the things that I'll just say on both the notion of Speak with Dead and Speak with Animals is I've seen a few people that have been worried that they need to have their party face character have both of these spells for interacting with animals and corpses. And by and large, it's okay if your charisma-based party face isn't the one that's casting these spells, because it's a great opportunity for some of your other characters to have some dialogue options too. And a fair number of the dialogue trees that you'll have with animals will rely on animal handling, and most of the Speak with Dead spells are just questions that you can ask the corpse and don't often require skill check. It does happen occasionally, but not as often as most conversations.
The final spell that we're going to talk about in our list of 10 spells that you should take in Baldur's Gate 3 is probably the one that you should never ignore, and that is Haste, which is available to sorcerers and wizards. Haste was already one of our favorite spells in the game of D&D, one of the most powerful spells in the game of D&D, especially in the hands of a sorcerer who can twin Haste. But they made it even more powerful in Baldur's Gate 3.
Quite simply, Haste doubles your movement speed, which, again, mobility matters in Baldur's Gate 3. Having that extra speed is huge on its own. But even more than that, it gives your character a full-on extra action. So effectively, it's like giving a character 2 turns in combat for the price of 1 spell. It's even better on a sorcerer where you can twin it and get even more characters affected by it. Or there are a couple magic items, and there's potions of speed as well that give you the effect of haste. And man, you just want to be quaffing those potions using those spells, because it's a game changer in boss battles.
Usually in D&D, Haste would only give you 1 additional action that you can use to make a single attack or an interaction or something of that nature. But the fact that in Baldur's Gate 3 it gives you a full other action means that if you have a character that has multi-attack and they are hasted, instead of just making a single extra attack, they get to make the full reign of their attacks.
This means that a 5th level fighter that has haste affecting them is making 4 attacks per turn instead of 2. They can then action surge again to make 2 more for 6 attacks as a 5th level character. Not a lot of foes and very few bosses are going to stand up to that much damage coming out of a fighter. And if you can combine that with a ranger shooting somebody, it just really takes it up another notch.
So that brings us to the end of our 10 most valuable spells to take in Baldur's Gate 3. We do have a couple honorable mentions, and these are honorable mentions because they're spells that almost everybody who has availability in these spells will probably be taking them anyway. They're also 2 spells that everybody who plays D&D takes anyway, so they're kind of memes at this point. but you should still consider them for Baldur's Gate 3, and that is Eldritch Blast and Fireball.
There's a lot of combat encounters in Baldur's Gate 3 where there are tons of enemies on the board. I have literally sat there in Act 2 waiting for the game to process the turns of a dozen foes for like 5 minutes while I just watched NPCs fight each other. And it's so much nicer when you can just fireball them and be done with it.
With the sheer amount of combat encounters and enemies, just packing Fireball seems like a no-brainer because you're going to wipe out the battlefield much quicker. With Eldritch Blast, you are able to attach Repelling Blast to that, which allows you a damaging ranged spell that also pushes targets. Again, with Larian Studios' level design and the sheer amount of verticality and cliffs and bridges and buildings that you can knock enemies off of, think about using your Eldritch Blast whenever you can to just remove an enemy from the battlefield quickly by knocking them off a ledge.
Eldritch Blast is notable because it lets you do this at range, unlike Shoving or Thunder Wave or many other lower level options which require you to be right next to or adjacent to the target that you want to push in this way. Eldritch Blast just sends them flying from a distance.
So that's our list of most amazing spells in Baldur's Gate 3. There's many other incredible spells in the game that you can use to your advantage. Tell us about your favorite picks in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, please consider becoming a patron of our show, getting on our patron-only Discord server to chat with us, show us your Baldur's Gate 3 characters, and much, much more.
And if you want to see us slinging some of these spells in actual play D&D, you can check that out in our Drakkenheim campaign, which airs Tuesday evenings on Twitch. You can find all the previous episodes right up over here.
And if you're looking for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, check out our other videos right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time
in the dungeon.